Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode. Hello and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. I am your host, Matthew Yonemura. Welcome to the new year. This is our first episode of the new year, but if you watched our live stream from the UPRISERS Family Drive, then you have already heard this interview, but hey, what's the problem in hearing it again? We're always really excited to share these podcast episodes, and another year of being the host of this podcast has been really cool. I started this podcast actually as an intern for Changing Tides while I was a youth volunteer on the CT crew. And then down the road, I got hired as the program coordinator, and I've just been sticking around working at Changing Tides and continuing this podcast. And it's really honestly been an honor to be able to do the podcast as part of the work that I do at Changing Tides. So it's been really cool. And this episode is no different. Another really cool interview with people one of them, if you listen to this podcast, you are familiar with. And I was actually a guest on one of the other individuals I interview in this episode. I was on their podcast, which is really cool. Both of them come from Yellow Chair Collective, which is a really great therapist collective that I work with for CT Stream. And I've gotten to know both these individuals through in-person events, through being on their podcast and being on the Changing Tides podcast. So yeah, it's just really cool to have them on during the Family Drive live stream as well. So without further ado, from the Yellow Chair Collective, we have Linda, Yoon, and Helen Garcia. We are coming back. I'm going to make sure the audio is coming through because I'm worried about, I've been worried about audio coming through or not, but let me make sure because there's a little delay of the actual stream.
No worries.
But I think we'll be good to go. Once I hear my voice, we will get started.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a little funky, but...
You're good.
Okay. It works. So we are here again at Family Drive. For people just now tuning in, we're doing 4 groups of interviews with really great groups. We just had designer and musician Rakeem Miles, and now we're coming to some of our really great community work and community organizations that are here with us today, Yellow Chair Collective. So thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
We're going to be doing groups of 40-minute interviews, so we'll try to fit in as much as we can within this 40-minute section, but we have 2 standard questions that we're asking everyone, and then we're going to try to just fill in the rest of the time with just trying to share about mental health and the work that Yellow Chair Collective does and about you two as individuals. So first things first, do you want to both introduce yourselves?
Yeah, my name is Linda Yoon. I'm the founder and co-director at Yellow Chair Collective. We are a mental health organization based in Los Angeles.
I'm Helen. I'm an associate therapist at Yellow Chair Collective. I'm also the outreach coordinator and do the film and podcast stuff.
Helen does a lot.
I do many things.
The first time I met Helen was at the historic Filipino town karaoke event.
Yeah. You had like a man bun.
I did. I had very long hair at the time.
And so when I met you again, I was like, is that you?
It's funny because we just had our 5th Changing Tides Gala. It was the 3rd one that I've been a part of.
Yeah.
But at all 3, I've had different styles. I had like a mullet thing the first year, and then I had the man bun, and now the shaved head.
I know. For people that are just like listening to us now, I interviewed you for our Yellow Chair podcast. And when doing research for you, there were like several pictures of you with different types of hair. Yeah. And then you're doing a documentary right now with like Rise Williams, and like your hair is like the hair you have now, but it's a little bit like grown out. And I was like, dang, this guy loves experimenting with hair.
It's at the point where I don't go to the barber anymore, so I either shave it all off or I don't touch it.
Oh,
so
that's smart.
It's just one or the other. But
that's smart.
So Helen, we've met through that event. I was on the Yellow Chair podcast. I've emailed you numerous times. I'm sure I've probably seen you multiple other times.
Yes.
And then Linda, I don't even know the first time we met. It's been a while.
It's been a while. Like we are in similar circle.
Yeah.
We are at a lot of AAPI, events in LA.
Yes.
I'm sure we've seen it around, but I'm a little shy, so I'm not the person who usually go up and introduce myself. I kind of like to be on the background. So that's probably why.
Well, I only set this stage because it makes it so much easier because I know both of you. And we've had long-form interviews. First it was Helen, or first I interviewed I don't remember which one came first.
I think it was Linda and Sujin first, and then it was me.
I interviewed you both, and then Helen interviewed me, so we're all kind of familiar with each other. But bringing us here today while we're live on location at Family Drive, I wanted to ask you both, like, what does being a part of Family Drive mean to both of you and to Yellow Chair Collective?
Yeah, we're really honored to be here, be part of it. I was really excited to volunteer. And seeing so many people, we were just talking, right? We were making sandwiches and just talking with others, like where they're from, how did they hear about the event. So many people from like such a diverse background, just wanting to serve, wanting to volunteer, wanting to just help out. That just embodies community, and that's all we are really about.
Well, I grew up going to family drives like this and like volunteering. So I got into filmmaking actually in high school because I started this program called Empower Youth. And I actually started like filming people behind the camera. And one of the reasons why I love coming here is because there's so many creative people and like everyone has like a camera in their hands, but also here to serve. So it's just nice to know that there are other people like me here, with like similar values.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, as I think we were discussing, I think we were filming, but how I've seen you both at events, or I've seen Yellow Chair Collective at many events before. I think it kind of just goes to show like how many diverse backgrounds come to such an important event like this. Like we're both mental health organizations, but then there's clothing designers, there's content creators, I think it just shows like how many different groups of intersections of people are just caring about what we're doing today. So I think it's really awesome.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask the next question we're asking everyone, and which is, when did your mental health journey begin? And I kind of asked you about yours already, but for new audiences, for this live one, do you want to share again?
Yeah. It's kind of hard to pinpoint like when the mental health journey began, but awareness perhaps kind of happened when I, in first grade, I was still living in Korea back at the time, and I'm not sure where I got the word depression, but I remember hearing somewhere, and I felt like that described what I was experiencing. And I remember telling my classmate that, and then the next day she started avoiding me. She was telling other people to avoid me. So I was very confused, and I kind of confronted her like, "Hey, like what happened? Like you're avoiding me." I don't even know how that courage came out. I just like something's wrong. I need to ask her directly. And she told me that, "Hey, you told me that you're depressed yesterday." And I told my mom, and my mom told me that do not hang out with crazy kids.
Oh my god.
So that was how deep the stigma was growing in Korea in back in 90s that I grew up there. And my parents also embodied that kind of attitude. So we immigrated when I was around 10 years old, and we had so much, we had some family violence and family immigration adjustment. There was a lot going on. And my little sister heard about therapy. Therapy did not really exist growing up.
Right.
Not even an idea. We keep our dirty laundry to ourselves. And my sister was, told my dad, because he was yelling at us about something, like maybe we should try therapy. And that got my dad even more angry, like just yelling at us. And I mean, And he just kind of blamed that you're making too many white friends.
Really?
Yeah, kind of like, oh, you're becoming too American,
Wow.
right? So kind of that battle between how do we still value, I guess, in some way, traditional values of my own culture, but like adjusting, in America, that was a struggle because my parents didn't want us to be like too American, but we also have to survive, live here. But the idea was very clear, like for us as Koreans, like we're not supposed to talk about mental health. But although it's not supposed to talk about, but you're becoming more aware about it because you know that that's not something you're not supposed to feel or talk. And that's kind of where my journey started because I started kind of questioning, much as I want to kind of like, oh, that's not something I should be talking about, that's shameful. But they also opened up like curious side of me, like why? Like we are really struggling, like there needs to be a better way.
I want to ask follow-ups, but I want to make sure I balance talking to both of you.
No, you're good. You can ask Linda questions if you have.
I think that might be smart before I forget.
Yeah, do it.
I think this kind of will incorporate both of you, but
Yeah.
it's interesting because our last guest, Rakeem, he was talking about how his mental health journey before, he didn't even know it was mental health, but like, he started being put on medications and everything in the first grade as well. Like his journey started in the first grade.
Wow.
So I think it's pretty eye-opening about how early people's mental health journeys begin, whether they're aware of it or not. So I feel like I wanted to ask you what was it like to feel that at such an early age? Like, do you think you fully had an understanding of it, or do you think it kind of took some time for you to reflect and be like, wow, that situation was pretty heavy for first grade?
My family have a lot of intergenerational trauma, like that I witnessed a lot of anger outbursts. We had violence in family. So the emotional aspect of like, oh, we're unstable wasn't really a thing. It's just kind of like what I grew up with. Like my parents are like that. I'm like that. I'm learning that, right? But I think when I start going to school, right, socializing, I'm like, oh, not everyone's like this. They're in their emotions. And I think that's when I realized maybe what I'm feeling is different. And then I don't even know, I still cannot remember where I got the idea or where I heard about depression. But when I heard it, I remember like that resonates. I think that's what I'm experiencing, and perhaps my family. And that's where I think my awareness became more. But my friend's reaction, right, really told me clear that that's not how I'm supposed to feel or I'm supposed to even talk about. So I feel like there's a lot of period of time that pretend those emotions didn't exist. But they come back. My family situation was very roller coaster all the time. And then immigration definitely made a lot more pressure. And in America, it was a little bit more open, talking about emotions, mental health. There's pushback from my family, but also people having conversation about mental health more and more, right? So it's been a journey. There was a big part of me that I'm like, I cannot open that Pandora box, like I'm not supposed to. Like it almost brings shame to my family if I do. So it took me a long time. Like even being in Korea in mental health was very conflicting for me for the longest time. And my parents didn't know what I was. I wonder though, sometimes they understand fully what I do still, but they thought I was working at a hospital. Hospital. So something like that. So it's still a journey. We have definitely had better conversation with my parents about mental health. They're more open, and Korea has changed a lot too. Like I'm so surprised with there's so many programs on TV in Korea that talk about mental health so openly, more than ever. It's still an ongoing journey though.
I'm so sorry to the listeners and also to my guests, because I hope I'm not coming off as rude. I'm just trying to balance multiple things on my computer and phone.
You're totally fine.
This is our first live stream, so I'm trying to balance quite a few things.
Yeah, no worries.
So I hope viewers don't think I'm being rude to my guests. I hope you don't feel that.
No, you're totally
okay,
fine.
Good.
I get it.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. The other thing is I'm going to grab a tissue right after I ask the question. But
Sure.
I want to ask you about when your mental health journey started.
Yeah. So this is a hard question because I always kind of knew that there was something wrong with the way that my parents talked to each other. And then, like, my mom always told me stories about my grandpa. So my grandpa died when I was 5, and it was like my first experience of death. Mm-hmm. But like my mom always like grew up telling me that my grandpa was a gambler. And I didn't know anything about addiction at the time, but my mom had like an addiction to cleaning and like control. And I didn't have words for that as a kid, but I would lose a hair clip and I would start to like have a panic attack when I would lose a hair clip. And then come high school, I started to struggle with a lot of like self-harm and depression. And it wasn't until I started dating like the first guy I ever dated, and he started telling me this thing called therapy. And then he started telling me, he's like, if I ever have kids, I never want them to feel like my problems become their problems.
Wow.
And then I started to think, I was like, oh, I didn't have the words for at the time, but I was like, I just know that something is wrong with me. Like every time I'm angry, I start to hurt myself, and I don't want to go through that anymore. And then I went to therapy at like 18. My first therapist was white, told me that my parents were crazy and that I had to like, excommunicate them. And I was like, that's not how you do it. Like something in me was like, that's not my truth. That's not my authenticity. And then I went to a second therapist. She said she was a Christian therapist, and she started talking more than she was hearing me. And then my third therapist was married to a South Asian Indian man. And she started to explain to me this thing called intergenerational trauma, that like we don't always know that there's this invisible thing called trauma and that it's been passed down to us. And so I didn't know that workaholism was a form of addiction. I had no idea that gambling was a form of addiction, and how gambling had like transcended into my mom's body and into my own, of like this self-hatred, feeling like I had to externalize all my control. So I've been with my same therapist for like 6 or 7 years. Started working at this coffee shop, and this woman named Linda, funny enough, would come to the coffee shop, and she would just like talk to me about her life. She was a victim of domestic violence. She started introducing me to her son. She introduced me to her mom, and then one day she wants me to become like a witness to her wedding. Wow. And I'm like, Linda, I'm working. I was like, I can't get fired from my job. And she says, you know, Helen, I just feel so safe with you. Like, have you ever thought about becoming a therapist? I was like, me? Become a therapist? And she's like, I don't know, you just have something about you that's like, it's so safe, and I feel like I can talk to you. And then I go and apply to therapy school. I'm like, I'm just going to do it. And then I get a full ride, and I just feel like the door just keeps opening further and further and further. And I paid like $0 to go to grad school, and then I just like, and then I'm here. Wow. And so I feel like it's almost like all of those experiences I feel like happened for me, because now that I work for Yellow Chair, I feel like there's an experience that we all cumulatively go through that we don't really have a name for. But my clients always say to me like, oh, you get it. Like, I feel like the way that you're looking at me, the way that you're summarizing everything, like you understand my experience. And so I hear from my clients all the time, like, oh my gosh, my last therapist told me to just like never talk to my mom again. And I was like, no, like your mom is operating out of her 5-year-old self. And like, you just have to like have compassion. So that's a long-winded way to like talk about my story, but now I'm here.
You summarized that really well. That was not long-winded.
I grew up in church, and like we always had to like share our testimony. And so I was like, I got really good at like, okay, da 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 da, da da da, and they're like, everyone's crying, and I'm like, eh.
So the other Linda, not this Linda, I could relate to her, because I'm like, the first time I spoke to you, I was like, your voice is the most soothing. I've bragged to Sujin and Linda about when I was on your podcast, or when I first did like the introductory interview with you, I was like, you have the most calming voice where I do feel heard and listened to. So I think they were right.
It's crazy because my voice started changing when I started going to therapy.
Oh, wow.
So, like, my voice was really high-pitched when I first started going to therapy. It kind of sounded like this. And then when I started going, it was almost like my body was stuck in this, like, 6 or 7-year-old me that just, like, wanted approval and wanted excellence. And now I feel like I'm functioning out of a place of excellence because I want to be of service.
Wow.
Not because I want to prove anything to anyone or prove anyone wrong. But it was, like, a lot of work and years of, like, hard work and toil. But I feel like me coming off with a voice of calmness is just a lot of the spiritual and internal work that I've started doing with myself.
That's awesome. Yeah. I have a few follows, but
Sure.
one is even in not hearing your voice. My girlfriend went through CT Stream, and she ended up with the therapist that she loved. She did her 10 sessions through CT Stream and is still seeing that therapist.
Cool.
So it worked out. But when she went through our directory, she gravitated to you.
What the heck?
So
That's so cool.
She's around, and she was like, "Ugh, I wish I was able to work with Linda. With Helen.
Yeah.
And we're going to be able to work that out with Yellow Chair to bring you guys back on our CT Stream directory. We're
That's
getting
so cool.
closer to that.
Yeah.
You're working on it right now.
Yeah, we're working on it. But that was the funniest thing. I was like once we spoke, I was like, oh, I feel like I would work really well with Helen if she were my therapist. And then it was so funny that she was like, oh, I really wanted to work with
That's
her.
crazy. You know what? I get that response all the time, especially with like young college Filipino women, because that's when I started my journey. And I know what it was like for them to like, I don't know how to describe it, but it's almost like you're surfing in the ocean and you get stuck in the deep waters and you're going like this asking to be rescued, but people are like telling you that you're just swimming wrong. And so when I meet with like clients from CT Stream, they always tell me like, oh, you don't want me to be anyone but myself. And then it kind of like, it's like a warmth almost that I feel with them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then one other follow-up, and then I want to get into the Yellow Chair as a whole with both of you.
Yeah.
But when that first boyfriend brought up, excuse me.
It's okay.
When that first boyfriend brought up therapy. Because that could be like, you need therapy, or it could be like, what are you trying to tell me? You know, like, how did that conversation go? Did he approach it with a calmness, or how did you receive it? Because I could see that going in so many different directions.
So many different ways. Well, he was talking about himself.
Oh. Okay.
So his dad was homeless and had chosen to stay homeless because apparently, it's a long-winded story, but like the mob. His dad was like a bail bonds businessman, and the mob like stole money from him and took away all of his money. And so out of justice, he stayed homeless for 7 years.
Wow.
And so my boyfriend at the time was telling me the immense trauma he went through just knowing that his dad chose justice over the kids. So by justice, I mean like parents got divorced, never really like stayed in each other's lives. And so he was talking about how like he never wanted to repeat that same mistake, but he felt like it was still inside of him. So he started getting therapy, and then I started getting therapy.
Wow.
So
that's amazing, because I feel like, you know, that could be a very, not in that scenario, but in other scenarios, that could be very gaslighty. But that very much so was one of the most appropriate ways to bring it up, I feel like.
Because if you met me at that time, you wouldn't have been able to tell that I had issues, because I was very good at covering it up, and I was like good at everything. And so I was getting straight A's, I had a scholarship, I was working multiple jobs. But like, I think that when it comes to mental health, people don't always know that there's a hidden side to our excellence.
Right.
And I think that's a huge part of my story.
Wow. So in bringing it all together, you went to school to become a therapist. It brings you to Yellow Chair Collective. And I don't even think we've had a chance to really introduce what Yellow Chair Collective is. So if we could maybe do that, I think
Look
that
us
would
up on Google.
we did link the Yellow Chair Instagram in the chat in case people want to check that out. But I do think it's great to hear it out loud. So who wants to take that away?
Well,
You founded the company.
Yeah, I feel like
so you go.
well, so Susan is my business partner, who's our executive director. We have been friends. We became friends working in a community mental health organization where we serve mostly East and Southeast Asians of low-income families. And we have witnessed a lot of gaps in the service, a lot of things that we kind of have to figure out in ways that what would be most effective for these families and individuals who bring so much intergenerational trauma and immigration. There was not just mental health, but there were so many like other barriers too, housing, food, etc. Working with low income communities, and we used to keep talking about how it would be great we can create this like a more holistic way of approaching working with his clients to bring more of a fuller healing, right? Not just individual, but also in a community way, which we did at that organization a little bit, and we saw a glimpse of how powerful that community healing was. And years later, I kind of got started in my practice. And I remember I wanted to focus on working with Asian clients, but people will say it's like in private practice, Asian clients don't want to pay for therapy. Like unless it's free, like they're not gonna be coming. That's not a priority.
That's so crazy because I feel like that's not true.
That wasn't true, but there was a lot more stigma when I started. And definitely there were some people who were like finding me very careful, very cautious, who are Asian, wanting to try. But my caseload was like 50% non-Asian and about 50% Asian. And then 2020 came along and we have pandemic happen and we have anti-Asian hate crimes happening, and then my caseload just became just like all Asian clients seeking. And then soon I had like a long wait list, and I've been wanting to always give back to the to like future therapists. I felt like growing in my program. Susan and I talk about it a lot, and then we also co-founded a nonprofit that focuses on training next generation of therapists, which is Entwine Community. We really felt like there was a lack of that training, that experience, if you want to serve your own community, especially in Asian American community. And Susan will talk about she took one multicultural class in her marriage and family program. That was
wild.
Like all cultures. Like I went to social work program, social workers, yay.
Social workers. We had a ton of classes that actually educated us on that.
But it was still, they were still lacking. There wasn't anything like Asian focus, right? So we really wanted to create that as well. So I got started hiring associates who want to serve Asian American population. And then as the time went on, everybody, as people know, 2020 to 2023, and still in some ways ongoing, the anti-Asian hate experiences were becoming really overwhelming. And a lot of people who never sought therapy or really hid their mental health, like seeing those violent images to people who look like you, who could be just you, or people who actually experience crimes, like we were overflowing and we couldn't keep up. And we just, recruiting, interviewing, and like training, and like it's been a busy last 3 years. And now we're over 40 therapists in California and New York currently.
That's amazing.
So Linda and Sujin are coming out with a book, and I started reading like the first couple of chapters, and like I'm going to create almost like comparison, because when Tyler Perry was coming up, they told him that no Black people would ever go to the movies.
Really?
And he was like, no, it's because you're not talking to them and you're not serving them. And if you ever get a chance to read like Where I Belong, the first 2 or 3 chapters, it talks about how huge Asia is and how we categorize Asian Americans as just East Asian. And I feel like so much of the population is not being spoken to in this country, let alone California. Like, like look around this entire Family Drive event. Most of the people that are here are of the minority, but most of them being Asian. And I feel like we're not speaking to them, or like our stories aren't being told. And so I feel like the messaging you got is similar to what Tyler Perry got when he started up, you know?
Yeah, we really expanded by having a lot of focus on community. We are doing a lot of partnerships.
Yeah.
We actually got quoted as a nonprofit a couple times.
That's so wild
right?
to me.
Yeah.
How, like, if you're serving a minority, you're
We operated like, I'm a social worker, so I operated like I'm running a social work organization
Right.
Yeah.
for longest time.
Yeah.
Hence, we have our own nonprofit now. But yeah, like we really got ourselves into doing a lot of pro bono work, a lot of like giving back, being in the community. And that really also helped people to know, like, oh, there's a therapy place for Asian Americans.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I'm being seen. Like, I've even told that to, like, people coming to our event or looking through our website. They are like, I just feel so seen, like, so empowered. I've never seen a therapist who looked like me in this, many people in one place.
Right.
Yeah.
so good.
So I think I want to trace it back to the anecdote you mentioned about your first therapist.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience. I did 2 sessions with my therapist, I think.
So frustrating.
And it was like I was getting cut off at every step. Like I would be trying to tell the backstory to what I wanted to discuss, and then she'd stop me to discuss this specific family dynamic or this specific thing. But it's like it was it was more of me listening than talking.
Yeah.
So I felt very seen by what you said there.
Yeah.
But what is the importance of culturally sensitive therapy? Like where have you seen that come up, either with clients or in your own experiences with a therapist?
With Filipino culture, there's so many different nuances that you don't always know about. Like, I had a client once whose therapist reported her mother to DCFS because she told her therapist, like, I'm uncomfortable with my mom, like, having nicknames for my private parts. And if you don't know the specificity of Filipino culture, we do have nicknames for private parts. It's just common in the culture. And then this, like, language barrier that happens, like, because every Filipino knows English doesn't mean that Filipinos talk in an American way. And there's this, like, direct, piercing bluntness that's in our culture that's not meant to be hurtful. It's just meant to be honest. And we value honesty and collectivity more than we do individuality. And so as a therapist, like, let's say you're a white therapist working with a Filipino client and you hear that your mom is, like, coming home from work and she's mad and she's telling you that she's mad that the dishes aren't washed and that XYZ. Like, that's just your mom airing out her frustration because she's had a bad day, but you have to learn to listen to the indirect body language. But when you're coming from American culture, like, you categorize that as abusive. And that's what happened to me as well, of like, oh, my mom's a narcissist or my mom has, like, personality disorder. But no, she was just tired and, like, she never learned all of these tools.
Right.
So I think that, like, cultural competency has a lot to do with just, like, being able to not assume, like, what your client is actually going through. Because even in the Filipino experience, like, I consider myself more Pacific Islander because there's, like, 10 islands in the Philippines and all of us have our different cultures. So, yeah.
Yeah, I actually really relate. Like, my first therapist was white as well in high school. I was going through a lot, so one of my mentors really convinced me, like, I feel like you really need therapy. And was able to find someone. But even we looked, there was an Asian therapist existing around me at the time.
Because most of them are doctors or engineers or stuff.
Like, I mean, that pressure that we had growing up. But yeah, and then I remember just hearing about my family because that was the main issue for my mental health. She just kept cutting me off and asking, like, so, like, why your parents did that? Like, couldn't wrap around her
Instead
head.
of asking you how you're doing, they're asking you why your parents thought that about you.
Like, why didn't your parents say that to you,
You know what's so funny is the fact that Helen latched onto that as being, like, comical. I was just like, I would ask that too because I'm not a therapist, you know what I mean?
Sure.
But, like, the fact that as a therapist, like, that's totally wrong.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like,
let's say that, like, how do I say this? Let's say a kid breaks a vase and the kid says to you, like, I broke a vase. The parent then yells at the child and says, why did you do it? What message does that send to the child? Like, never say that to me again, like, shaming, like, you did something wrong. And, like, usually when you want to ask why, it's either coming up from a place of curiosity or a place of shame. And like when a therapist asks why, like you have to understand that you're in a position of power.
Right.
And then for a lot of children, especially Asian kids, like they hear that as like, oh, I'm wrong. That like this was my experience. And so oftentimes as a therapist, especially from an Asian American standpoint, you have to ask like, how did that make you feel?
Yeah.
You know, because you don't need to explain, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely had to explain a lot about, well, I was young, so like I don't even have my own explanation, right? So it become a very frustrating situation when this therapist who has no idea about my culture, family dynamic, just kind of like labeling as like just malfunctioning. Something's really wrong with your family. You know how you're responding to each other. I mean, there were some legitimate concerns. I'm not gonna ignore that, but it was very like. You asked me why, like, I don't even know why at that age, and I'm in high school. So that was very uncomfortable experience, my first therapy experience. And I remember, like, maybe my parents are right, you know?
Wow.
Therapy wasn't for Asian people. And then that made me not want to pursue therapy for the longest time. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's pretty eye-opening, but I think it's really interesting, too, because on the flip side, we've encountered people through CT Stream and the people I know outside of CT Stream who will seek therapy specifically outside of their direct culture, whether it's a JA, wanting to have a JA therapist, or having someone non-JA specifically, seeking someone outside of the culture because it feels too close to home. Have you encountered anything like that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I had friends who did that. It's like, oh, I think I can work with Asian therapists too close to me, or they are willing to have Asian therapists because they're Asian, but like, let's say they're Korean. They're willing to have some like Asian therapists, but not Korean therapists. Feels too close,
Right.
You know, because a lot of time it can feel a little triggering to having worked through certain aspects of your culture, right? So yeah, we get that once in a while. It's not a common thing because we specialize in Asian American therapy. But we do have people like, I want an Asian therapist, but not of my direct culture.
Yeah. I remember when I first started working at Yellow Chair, I had a client consultation, and he asked me, he was like, why is Asian American therapy important? And I remember telling him, I was like, it's something that only you can answer. Because if it's not something that is important to you, I don't have to convince you to work with me. And I think that, like, in my experience, having an Asian American therapist is usually because you want to understand and you want to stop hating people, you know?
We got the 5-minute sign. So I need to make sure I'm pointed with my questions here. But, I think, what have you seen change since the creation of Yellow Chair? I mean, it hasn't been super long, but I think the field of mental health and the way the general public talks about it has completely changed over the span of 5 years, Have you noticed a shift in how people come to you for therapy, or how like the discussions around therapy have changed? Like, has there been a shift, do you feel?
I feel like popular culture definitely made therapy a lot more normalized. During pandemic, because everybody was struggling with mental health, isolated, there was a lot of focus on mental health, making it okay, like everybody's struggling. Someone made a comment the other day that they felt like, since we're kind of going back to like quote unquote normal, that they feel like
what is normal?
I know what is normal. That's why I said quote unquote normal. That it feels a little bit like, oh, people are like less about mental health. Like I think environment changes and people adjust. There's other ways to cope. Besides going to therapy, right? Which we don't think healing only happens in therapy. Like, healing happens in the community, healing happens in the nature. Like, there's other ways that we have to take care of ourselves. But yes, people, especially in the Asian American community, there has been a lot more conversations that got started. Because we had to have that conversation in some ways, right? There was just too much we were seeing, enduring, and we had to really come together as a community. And we saw that, like, there, like, before pandemic and now, there's a lot more Asian American resources around mental health than ever before. Like, I remember when I was first starting, there wasn't any. Like, I'm like, is there any other Asian American, like, resources out there? There was barely any, and there's so many more. And Sujin and I are releasing a book that's coming out in January 9th called Where I Belong. And I remember when we were talking to our agent, it was gonna be one of like the first books.
Yeah.
But as we are finding out, there's gonna be a lot more books coming out next year about Asian American mental health.
Wow.
That we've been connecting. Like, we're so excited about it.
That's so cool.
It's like, it was like 0, and then like, I know Dr. Ron's book's out right now. Like 1 to like, there's gonna be so many more. And like, we were building this community, and we were hoping to do some kind of like, in AAPI mental health books, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah, they'll be really cool. This is a dream right now. Anybody want to sponsor? We need sponsors. Yeah. So those, yeah, definitely we'll talk.
I'm interested. I'm interested in the AAPI mental health book fair.
Yeah,
that would be so cool.
We are just really excited about that right now.
Panel.
Yeah. We'll talk.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we only have a couple minutes left, but is there anything else besides the book? Like, what else is on the horizons for you both, or what are you excited about Yellow Chair Collective, or?
Yeah, especially last year and this year, we started to do more like in-person events, really building community here in Los Angeles as well. And like our virtual communities are still going on. We have some community in New York, and Washington is being formed right now as well. Awesome. So yeah, we're really excited about having more community-focused events. Our nonprofit Entwine community, we serve a lot of pro bono and low fee services for Asian American clients. And then we just want to continue doing our work and just continue building on that community.
Great.
Have anything you want to add?
I feel like I'm really grateful that you founded the company, because I feel like I've changed by even just being an employee of the company. Like, I actually was reading the book because I'm so lucky I got an early release, but I was like, I feel like I didn't know I had like a stress and anxiety when I went into the company, and ever since like a year or so of like working for you, I feel like I'm more myself than I've ever been, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being on our team. You didn't, that was a choice you also made too.
Yeah. Do we have time?
Yeah, go for it, please.
I didn't get accepted the first time, remember?
You didn't?
I applied, and then I emailed you back. I was like, if you want like free podcast stuff, I'll help you. And then you were like, yeah, we have openings.
It was more of
because you were looking for a couples therapist.
We were looking for couples therapists. And we were looking for maybe someone who could also help with media.
Yeah.
But it was. My memory is really, really vague right now.
It's okay. It's okay. You're busy.
Well, we did not hire her for free. I want to make that clear. We hire her
like an actual employee.
Yeah, actual employee, because we were also looking for someone who can do therapy and someone who can do media. Yeah. And then once you mentioned it, I'm like, maybe that's something we can work with. I mean, you've been a really great hire. So thank you.
Thanks, Linda.
I will be reffing their fight after this, as Helen brought up the wait to get hired. But in all seriousness, thank you both for your time. We already have the Yellow Chair Instagram and websites and Entwine community in the chat linked for people to check out. But we'll be back in about 5 minutes with our next guests. And thank you both so much. Great to talk with you both again.
Thank you for having us.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to both Helen and Linda for being on the podcast and joining me at the UPRISERS Family Drive. As always, it was great to see them. It was great to have them on the podcast. And, this is the most I've talked to Helen about herself, because I was on her podcast, the Yellow Chair Collective podcast, where she was talking about me. So it was really cool to kind of reverse roles. And then with Linda, again, it's always great to hear from her and get to learn more about both of them. So if you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to our show for episodes that release every other Tuesday, and give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support the podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides, or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tide on mental health.